My cousin humiliated my autistic son during her wedding reception and then went so far as to call CPS on me with fabricated accusations, trying to take him away from me. But when I fought back in court and exposed her lies, the truth destroyed her and completely changed how my entire family saw her forever. The moment my cousin, Vanessa, publicly shamed my autistic son and subsequently called Child Protective Services, she unwittingly set in motion a rapid reversal of fortunes. She had no idea how quickly the tide would turn. My 7-year-old, Mikey, who navigates the world with semi-low-functioning autism, is often excluded from social gatherings. More times than not, acquaintances or friends explicitly request his absence, which means my presence at events is rare. So, when Vanessa's wedding was announced, Mikey was the very first person I shared the news with. I harbored a hopeful expectation that my aunt's side of the family might prove more understanding. "Really, Daddy? Truly? I can attend." He burst out, his excitement palpable. An enthusiastic "absolutely" for me sent him leaping into my arms, and we spun in a joyful embrace. One beautiful facet of his autism is his remarkable capacity to find delight in life's simplest moments. As we journeyed to the wedding rehearsal, I diligently prepared Mikey on proper etiquette, silence during the vows, maintaining quiet composure, acknowledging that this day belonged entirely to the bride. He appeared remarkably attentive, leading me to believe everything would proceed smoothly. We were midway through the practice ceremony when Mikey's face lit up with an enormous smile, a clear indicator of profound happiness. I gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, a silent affirmation of shared joy, and we remained utterly still. However, the tranquility shattered the instant Vanessa reached the altar. "Excuse me, what is he doing here?" she shrieked. My heart sank. I glanced at Mikey, still beaming, completely unaware he was the target of her outburst. A deafening silence fell over everyone else. Instead of simply continuing with her ceremony, Vanessa spun to her fiancé, bellowing like a banshee, "I thought you told him not to come." By this point, her finger was pointed directly at Mikey, and his innocent smile crumpled into tears. A hushed murmur spread through the onlookers. I caught sight of a few faces twisted with open disgust towards her, though they were sadly outnumbered. Most of the audience nodded in stark agreement, as if Mikey's very presence was an unpardonable offense. I fantasized about screaming at Vanessa, declaring my wish for her demise from obesity so Mikey and I could dance on her grave. But I held my tongue. I wanted to be a proper example for Mikey. So, we simply turned and exited the building. Once outside the church, Mikey's composure fractured into a full emotional storm. "Why would she say that about you, Daddy? That was so cruel." I silently thanked the heavens he hadn't grasped her true target. "Son," I explained gently, "some individuals are just bitter because they don't have peace within themselves." Fortunately, this was merely the rehearsal. The actual wedding took place 2 days later. Mikey, still convinced our prior visit was the real event, accepted without question when I left him with a sitter for the day. I hold the institution of marriage in high regard, so for the initial half of the day, I allowed Vanessa to enjoy her moment, completely undisturbed. It wasn't until dinner that I tapped my glass, signaling my intent to make a toast. The room hushed. Vanessa seized the lull to mouth the words, "Thank you for not bringing him." I offered a smile, though certainly not for the reason she imagined. "As you can observe," I began, my voice cutting through the suddenly strained atmosphere, "I am currently at this wedding without my wonderful son, Mikey." An awkward tension filled the air, but I paid it no mind. Many of you preferred his absence today. Yet, he still wished to convey a few thoughts. I then retrieved my phone and initiated a secret voice recording I'd made of Mikey. In terms a 7-year-old would use, he spoke of his profound happiness for Vanessa and her husband. Hearing his voice, so brimming with genuine delight, brought tears to my own eyes and to those of most at the table. Everyone, that is, except Vanessa, whose face was so contorted with fury, I genuinely expected an explosion. Nevertheless, she clinked glasses with me and the rest of the family. Unbeknownst to me, that tranquil moment was merely the precursor to the impending tempest. Less than 24 hours later, a sharp knock echoed at the door. It wasn't Vanessa. It was Child Protective Services. They posed a few vague inquiries before striding past me, commencing an examination of my home. My mind reeled. I barely comprehended the situation. The woman, appearing recently graduated from college, meticulously documented every perceived flaw on her clipboard. "Mikey's mattress lacks a bed frame due to overstimulation?" Noted. "Plastic coverings on furniture from Mikey's toilet mishaps?" Noted. "Cupboard locks for protection from sharp objects?" All noted. All marked as evidence. I attempted to explain his autism, but she murmured dismissively under her breath, "That's what they all claim." After a hushed phone call to a superior, she informed me of an emergency removal order. Mikey would be placed with his closest relative. I immediately suggested his grandmother. The subsequent 72 hours plunged me into a living hell. My stomach was in knots, and I felt utterly helpless. More than anything, I was incensed. I harbored an unwavering certainty that Vanessa was orchestrating this, and I vowed that once this nightmare concluded, she would answer for it. This transcended mere exclusion from a wedding. She was actively attempting to sever my bond with my son permanently. Alone in my silent house, surrounded by Mikey's toys and clothes, I began making calls. First, to a lawyer specializing in family court and disability rights. Then, to my mother, who confirmed Mikey had not been placed with her despite my request. Finally, to Mikey's developmental pediatrician, Dr. Chen, who reacted with sheer outrage upon hearing the full account. "No one interferes with my son. No one," she asserted forcefully. Vanessa had profoundly miscalculated. The following morning, I frantically gathered every document pertaining to Mikey's care: medical records, therapy evaluations, school IEPs, notes from his pediatrician, anything that could attest to my capabilities as a father. My hands trembled so violently I struggled to organize the papers. My thoughts continuously drifted to Mikey and his whereabouts. Was he receiving his prescribed medications? Were they aware of his sensory sensitivities? Was someone ensuring he had his special blanket at night? I contacted Dr. Chen again, hoping she could provide a letter detailing his necessary accommodations. She was utterly incensed by the situation. "I have been Mikey's physician for 5 years," she stated with firm resolve. "These accommodations are medically imperative, not indicators of neglect. I will have a letter ready for you within the hour, and I am prepared to testify if required." While awaiting her documents, I reached out to my neighbor, Morgan, a special education teacher. She has known Mikey since he was 4 and had been instrumental in helping me implement many of his at-home strategies. She immediately offered to compose a character reference. "This is absolutely preposterous," she declared. "I witness you with Mikey daily. You are the most dedicated father I know." By midday, I possessed a substantial stack of documentation and was en route to meet with Elizabeth Reyes, the lawyer I'd contacted. She specialized in cases involving children with disabilities and came highly recommended by a parent support group I was a part of. Her office, though modest, felt inviting, adorned with children's artwork. Elizabeth, however, was all business, taking meticulous notes as I recounted everything from the wedding invitation to the CPS intervention. "So you believe your niece instigated this call as retribution for the recording?" she inquired, her eyebrows slightly raised. I affirmed this with a nod. "I realize it sounds paranoid, but the timing is simply too precise. Less than 24 hours after I publicly embarrassed her at her wedding, CPS appears." Elizabeth showed no surprise. "Regrettably, vindictive false CPS reports are far more common than you might imagine. The good news is, we can challenge this." She elaborated that an emergency removal mandated a hearing within 72 hours. We needed to be prepared to present our defense, which necessitated further documentation and witnesses capable of validating my parenting. "In the interim," she added, "I will file an emergency motion for visitation. They cannot legally prevent you from seeing Mikey while this investigation unfolds." I departed her office with an extensive list of tasks and drove directly to Mikey's school. The principal, Mrs. Taylor, was aghast when I relayed the events. She promptly retrieved Mikey's file and promised to draft a letter detailing his progress and our consistent meetings. "I've observed your interactions with him at every school event," she told me. "Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you two knows the depth of your devotion." On my journey home, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was taut with indignation. "I just finished speaking with your Aunt Linda." Apparently, Vanessa informed her that Mikey suffered a complete breakdown at the rehearsal, and you made no effort to manage him. My blood boiled. "What?" He was utterly quiet until she began screaming. "I know," Mom responded, "but she's disseminating claims that you're neglectful and that Mikey is dangerous and uncontrollable." Linda mentioned Vanessa's apprehension regarding your capacity to manage his needs. This illuminated the CPS call's genesis. Vanessa had depicted me as an incapable father, unable to handle his son's disability. The realization turned my stomach. Upon arriving home, another surprise awaited: a Facebook message from Thomas, Vanessa's new husband. It simply read, "I had no involvement in this. My apologies." I was uncertain whether to trust him, but I captured a screenshot nonetheless. It might prove useful later. My phone rang again. An unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Williams, this is Jordan from Child Protective Services. I am Mikey's assigned caseworker." My heart skipped a beat. "Where is my son? Is he safe?" "He is currently in emergency placement with a foster family experienced with autistic children." His tone was notably gentler than the woman who had initially visited my home. "I understand you requested placement with your mother?" "Yes," I quickly affirmed. She is intimately familiar with his routines, his medications, everything. We are exploring that option, but I wanted to inform you that a supervised visit has been approved for tomorrow at 2 p.m. at our office. I nearly collapsed with profound relief. Thank you. I will certainly be there. After ending the call, I immediately contacted Elizabeth to update her. She expressed satisfaction regarding the visit but cautioned me to exercise prudence. They will be observing your interactions meticulously, she warned. Be natural, but maintain your composure, even if Mikey becomes distressed. Refrain from any negative remarks about CPS or accusations concerning your niece. That night stretched endlessly. I repeatedly found myself entering Mikey's room, half expecting to see him curled up with his dinosaur plushies. The emptiness of his bed caused a sharp ache in my chest. I ultimately lay down on his floor, simply to feel a proximity to him. The following day, I arrived at the CPS office an hour early, clutching Mikey's cherished comfort item, a soft blue octopus toy he affectionately called Squish. The waiting room was drab, filled with faded posters and uncomfortable seating. I watched the clock's agonizingly slow progression, minute by minute. When they finally brought Mikey in, I had to physically restrain myself from rushing towards him. He appeared utterly exhausted, with dark circles beneath his eyes. Upon seeing me, his entire face illuminated. Daddy. He launched himself into my arms, and I enveloped him in a tight embrace. Over his shoulder, I observed the caseworker, Jordan, watching us with a neutral expression. Hey, buddy. I managed, my voice thick with emotion. I missed you so much. Mikey spoke a mile a minute, recounting tales of the unfamiliar house and the woman who doesn't cut sandwiches right. It broke my heart that he couldn't comprehend why he couldn't return home with me. When our allocated hour concluded, his emotional collapse was catastrophic. He clung to me, screaming and sobbing. I attempted our usual calming techniques, but nothing worked. The more distressed he became, the more I feared it reflected poorly on me. I want to go home, he wailed as a staff member gently attempted to separate him. I want my daddy. It required every ounce of my strength to prevent myself from breaking down as I watched them lead my hysterical son down the corridor. Once he was out of sight, I sat in my car and wept. Back at home, I checked my email to find Dr. Chen's letter, emphatically stating that all of Mikey's home accommodations were entirely appropriate and medically recommended. I forwarded it to Elizabeth just as my phone rang again. It was my mother. I just received a call from CPS. They're conducting a home inspection tomorrow to assess if I can temporarily take Mikey. This represented progress. If they approved Mom's residence, at least Mikey would be with family until we could secure his permanent return. That's wonderful, Mom. Did they mention anything else? There was a pause. Only that they received additional concerns regarding your care of Mikey. My stomach lurched. Additional concerns from whom? They wouldn't disclose, she replied grimly. But I have a very strong suspicion. Vanessa was escalating her efforts. I wondered what new fabrications she was weaving now. The thought provoked enough anger for me to do something I probably shouldn't have. I called her directly. To my astonishment, she answered. What do you desire? Her voice was cold. I want to understand why you are attempting to remove my son from my care, I stated, struggling to maintain a steady tone. She scoffed. I am merely expressing legitimate concerns about my nephew. Mikey requires professional assistance, not just you inventing excuses for his conduct. He receives professional assistance. He has doctors and therapists and he still cannot behave appropriately in public, she interjected. Your indulgence of his behavior at my rehearsal unequivocally demonstrates your inability to manage him. I was so taken aback, I could barely articulate a response. He was perfectly quiet until you began screaming at him. That is not how I recall it, she said smugly. Nor do most of the guests. It was then that the realization struck me. She was soliciting adverse statements from other individuals. I disconnected the call before I could utter something I would regret. I immediately contacted Elizabeth to apprise her of the conversation. She advised me against any further communication with Vanessa and instructed me to document all preceding events. I spent the remainder of the evening meticulously detailing a timeline from the initial wedding invitation to the CPS visit. The hearing was scheduled for the subsequent day. Elizabeth met me outside the courthouse, radiating confidence in a sharp suit. We possess robust documentation, she assured me, and Dr. Chin will provide testimony via phone. As we entered, I observed Vanessa seated in the hallway alongside an older woman I did not recognize. She smirked upon seeing me. The hearing room was compact and less formal than anticipated. The judge, an elderly man named Judge Williams, reviewed the initial CPS report while Elizabeth presented our comprehensive documentation, the letters from Dr. Chun, Mrs. Taylor, and Morgan, alongside all of Mikey's medical records. Your Honor, Elizabeth articulated, the accommodations flagged as concerning by CPS are, in fact, all medically prescribed for a child with Mikey's specific needs. They do not signify neglect but rather vigilant and attentive parenting. The initial CPS worker who had inspected my home testified next, describing her findings. When Elizabeth cross-examined her regarding her experience with autistic children, she conceded she possessed limited training. And did you consult with any autism specialists before determining these accommodations were inappropriate? Elizabeth pressed. Well, no, but thank you, Elizabeth smoothly interrupted. Dr. Chen's testimony was compelling. She elucidated each accommodation in meticulous detail and justified its necessity for Mikey. She also underscored Mikey's remarkable progress under my care. I have patients whose parents refuse to implement these strategies, she stated firmly. Mr. Williams has gone above and beyond to cultivate an optimal environment for his son. I believed we were making significant headway until the CPS attorney called his next witness, Vanessa. She approached the front, affecting a solemn demeanor, though I could discern the underlying satisfaction in her eyes. She recounted the rehearsal incident in a starkly altered fashion, alleging Mikey had been disruptive and unruly. She further claimed to have witnessed me manhandling him when he became agitated. I've been concerned about my uncle's parenting capabilities for years, she declared with feigned sincerity. I only contacted CPS because I genuinely feared for Mikey's well-being. Elizabeth's cross-examination was merciless. Miss Johnson, is it not true that you initiated the call to CPS less than 24 hours after Mr. Williams played a recording of his son at your wedding reception? Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. The timing is merely coincidental. And is it not true that you explicitly did not desire Mikey's presence at your wedding? Because of his autism, that's not. Yes or no, please. Vanessa glared. I desired an adult-only wedding. Elizabeth offered a subtle smile. Yet several children were present, correct? Your flower girl, ring bearer, and at least 3 other guests' children? Vanessa's face flushed. Those children know how to conduct themselves. So, it was not an adult-only wedding, Elizabeth continued. You specifically excluded one child, Mikey, solely due to his disability. The judge was now observing Vanessa intently. Elizabeth pressed on with her questioning, establishing that Vanessa had rarely interacted with Mikey prior to the wedding and possessed no expertise in autism or child development. One final question, Elizabeth posed. Did you inform your guests that Mr. Williams should not bring Mikey to the rehearsal? Vanessa hesitated. I might have mentioned it to a few individuals. So, you deliberately excluded a child based on his disability, then contacted child services when his father drew attention to this discrimination? Objection, the CPS attorney interjected. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge responded, though his brow was furrowed as he looked at Vanessa. When the time arrived for closing statements, Elizabeth emphasized that while Mikey's care might appear unconventional to someone unfamiliar with autism, every aspect of my home environment was meticulously designed for his welfare. The sole evidence presented against my client, she concluded, is the testimony of a woman who has exhibited clear prejudice against his son and who filed this report immediately after being humiliated at her own wedding. The judge declared a brief recess to review all the evidence. Those 20 minutes felt interminable. I repeatedly replayed Vanessa's testimony in my mind, incensed by her distorted narrative. When Judge Williams returned, he looked directly at me. Mr. Williams, he stated, I am dismissing the emergency removal order. Based on the evidence presented, I find no indication of neglect or harm. In fact, quite the opposite. The surge of relief was so profound, I nearly toppled from my chair. However, he continued, I am mandating a follow-up home visit with a specialist in developmental disabilities to ensure all accommodations remain appropriate. Until then, your son will be placed with his grandmother, with unrestricted visitation for you. It wasn't a complete triumph, but it was remarkably close. Mikey would be with family, and I could see him whenever I desired. As we exited the courtroom, Vanessa shoved past me, her face contorted with rage. This is not over, she hissed. Elizabeth placed a hand on my shoulder. Actually, I believe it is, she stated loudly enough for Vanessa to hear. And should you make any further false reports, my client will pursue legal action for harassment. I was permitted to collect Mikey from the foster home that afternoon. The foster mother seemed kind, but admitted he had struggled. He's barely slept, she informed me gently. He keeps asking for his daddy and his room. When Mikey saw me, he was initially cautious, as if fearing I might vanish again. But when I told him we were going to Grandma's house, his entire body relaxed. And you'll be there too? He asked anxiously. Every single day, buddy, I promised. During the drive to my mom's, Mikey drifted off to sleep, clutching Squish. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, still not quite believing he was back with me. At Mom's house, we collaboratively prepared his temporary room, aiming to make it as familiar as possible. I brought his weighted blanket, his visual schedule board, and several of his cherished books. Mom had already stocked the refrigerator with all his preferred foods. I always suspected that girl was trouble, Mom muttered as we worked. Even as a child, she was a bully. I recounted Vanessa's courtroom threat. Mom shook her head. Let her attempt something, she declared fiercely. We are fully prepared for her now. That night, I stayed at Mom's, sleeping on an air mattress beside Mikey's bed. Around midnight, I awoke to find him standing next to me, tears streaking his face. What's amiss, buddy? I inquired, pulling him close. I had a bad dream, he whispered. The mean lady took me away again. I held him tight, assuring him no one would ever take him away. Eventually, he fell back asleep in my arms, and I carefully returned him to bed. The following morning, I received a surprising email from Jordan, the CPS caseworker. He wished to meet with me to discuss some new developments. My stomach nodded instantly, but I agreed to see him during Mikey's school hours. Jordan met me at a coffee shop, appearing somewhat ill at ease. I wanted to speak with you off the record, he began after we were seated. We received another report about you yesterday. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. Allow me to guess, from my niece, Vanessa? Jordan shook his head. That's precisely it. It wasn't from her. It was from an individual named Charles Johnson, who claimed to be your uncle. I blinked in bewilderment. I don't have an Uncle Charles. The only Charles in the family is, recognition dawned. That's Vanessa's father. My mother's brother. Jordan nodded slowly. The accusations are almost identical to your niece's. Too similar to be mere coincidence. She's now using her father to file these reports. I articulated, the pieces falling into place. Since she knows you've caught on to her tactics. Under normal circumstances, we would have to investigate any new report, Jordan explained. But given the recurring pattern here and Dr. Ramirez's recent positive assessment, my supervisor has flagged this as potentially malicious. He paused. I shouldn't be sharing this with you, but I felt you should be aware of what you're up against. I expressed my gratitude for the heads up, my mind already racing with this fresh information. Upon returning home, I immediately contacted Elizabeth and explained Jordan's disclosure. This is, in fact, perfect, she remarked, sounding almost delighted. Now we can definitively demonstrate a pattern of coordinated harassment. I would like to amend our cease and desist letter to include all members of Vanessa's immediate family. While Elizabeth worked on the legal aspects, I resolved it was time to enlist my own reinforcements. I called my mother and thoroughly briefed her on everything. Vanessa's visit, Uncle Charles's false report, every detail. Mom was livid. Charles always catered to his precious daughter's every whim, she fumed, but this is truly beyond the pale. I'm convening a family meeting. I attempted to dissuade her, concerned it would only escalate tensions, but Mom was unyielding. This is no longer solely about you and Mikey. They are dragging the entire family into their vendetta. Everyone needs to comprehend what is truly transpiring. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my mom's house. I was a bundle of nerves leading up to it, especially when Mom informed me she had invited everyone, including Vanessa and her parents. I arranged for Mikey to have a playdate with his friend from therapy, so he wouldn't have to endure the stress. When Sunday arrived, I was astonished by the number of attendees, aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in years. Evidently, the family drama had piqued everyone's curiosity. Vanessa arrived with her parents, her face a carefully constructed mask of composure that fractured upon observing the multitude of relatives present. Mom immediately assumed control. I have assembled you all here today because there's been a campaign of harassment waged against my son and grandson, she announced once everyone was seated, and it originates from within this very family. You could have heard a pin drop. Mom meticulously recounted everything in chronological order. The wedding incident, the CPS calls, the false accusations. She had printed copies of Dr. Ramirez's report and the cease and desist letter, which she circulated amongst the attendees. And now, she concluded, her gaze fixed directly on Uncle Charles, we have reason to believe others are filing false reports to perpetuate this harassment. Uncle Charles flushed scarlet. I was merely concerned about the boy. You have seen Mikey precisely twice in the last 3 years, Mom interjected, both times at family gatherings that you promptly departed. You possess no understanding of his needs. Aunt Linda, another of Mom's siblings, spoke up. Vanessa informed us Mikey was uncontrollable at the wedding rehearsal, that he was screaming and disrupting everything. That is a fabrication, I stated firmly. Mikey remained completely silent until Vanessa began screaming at him. Inquire of anyone who was genuinely observing. To my surprise, one of Vanessa's bridesmaids cleared her throat. He is correct, she conceded, not quite meeting Vanessa's furious gaze. The little boy was simply sitting there, smiling. Vanessa was the one who lost her temper. You witch, Vanessa hissed at her former friend. After all I have done for you, enough. It was Thomas, standing in the doorway. I hadn't even realized he was present. Enough deception, Vanessa. The room fell silent once more as Thomas entered and stood beside me. I have witnessed this unfold for too long, he declared. First the wedding, then convincing Jenna to provide that false statement to CPS, then involving your father. Vanessa surveyed the room, clearly comprehending that she was losing her audience. You don't comprehend, she attempted. He intentionally humiliated me at my wedding by playing that recording. After you publicly disgraced his son by screaming at him for merely existing. Thomas countered. I advised you to apologize back then, and none of this would have transpired. Uncle Charles appeared increasingly uneasy as more family members began whispering amongst themselves, many casting disapproving glances at Vanessa and her parents. Aunt Maria, who had remained silent until this point, finally spoke. I invariably bring my daughter, who has Down syndrome, to family events. Are you implying she would not have been welcome at your wedding either? The momentum shifted rapidly. One by one, family members articulated their disappointment in Vanessa's conduct. Some shared anecdotes of her past cruelty or exclusionary behavior. It was as if a dam had burst, releasing years of suppressed grievances. Finally, Uncle Charles rose. This meeting is concluded, he announced unsteadily. Vanessa, Linda, we are departing. But before they could leave, my mother positioned herself in front of the door. Not until I make one thing unequivocally clear, she declared. If any of you file another false report, contact CPS, or disseminate falsehoods about my son or grandson again, I will personally ensure every individual in this family knows precisely what kind of people you are. And we will pursue every legal option available to us. The room erupted in a chorus of supportive affirmations. Vanessa looked around at the united front arrayed against her and finally seemed to grasp the full extent of her defeat. Without another word, she pushed past my mother and exited, her parents hastily following. Thomas remained behind. I regret not confronting her sooner, he confessed to me. I continuously hoped she would regain her senses. I nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had just transpired. Thank you for your presence today. It truly made a difference. In the days that followed, the family rallied around us in ways I had never anticipated. Aunt Maria invited Mikey for a playdate with her daughter. Uncle James, with whom I had barely spoken in years, called to inquire if Mikey might enjoy fishing at his lake house. It was as if Vanessa's attempts to isolate us had completely backfired. Elizabeth called a week later with encouraging news. We have received formal written agreements from Vanessa, Charles, and Linda stating they will cease all communication regarding you and Mikey, direct or indirect. They have acknowledged that any further false reports will result in immediate legal action. So, it's truly over? I asked, scarcely daring to believe it. It appears that way, she confirmed. How are you and Mikey faring? I glanced out the window, where Mikey was absorbed in play in the backyard, meticulously examining insects with a magnifying glass, completely immersed. We're doing wonderfully, actually. Even better than before all of this began. The entire ordeal had been terrifying, yet it had yielded an unexpected outcome. For the first time, Mikey was genuinely embraced by the family. Individuals who had previously found excuses to avoid interacting with him were now actively striving to comprehend autism and accommodate his needs. 2 months later, we attended a family barbecue at my cousin William's house. Mikey was initially hesitant, clutching my hand as we approached the gathering. But then Aunt Maria's daughter spotted him and dashed over, seizing his free hand. Come see the sprinkler. It's super splashy, she exclaimed. And after a questioning glance at me and my encouraging nod, Mikey allowed himself to be led away. I watched him playing with the other children, his joyful hand flapping eliciting curious, yet kind inquiries from his cousins rather than stares or whispers. Someone offered me a beer, and I turned to see Thomas. He seems to be enjoying himself thoroughly, he observed, nodding towards Mikey. Indeed, I replied, feeling a profound contentment I had not experienced in a very long time.